I'll leave it to you to share the screen when it's time.
I probably need some prompting.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. My name is David Robinson. I am the Director of Membership and Meetings at the Linguistic Society of America. Welcome and thanks for taking the time to be here today. I'm going to suggest that we wait just a few more minutes until more of our attendees get logged on. So please sit tight and we'll get started in about 3 or 4 minutes.
Let's find out where the button is.
I wouldn't mess with anything.
Okay.
I think when it's time. Okay, wait, he has the podium. So he has to give it over to us before we get an option. I think that's the deal.
All right.
You're doing this stuff work anyways.
No.
Okay, you are.
That's true. I'm doing that work.
Oh, it's good.
Yeah.
Code GRFP for a coupon.
Membership?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. I should do that.
I'm a life member.
Yeah.
Did that last year.
That's good. I should do that. I'm going to see you order tonight for dinner.
Oh,
It'd be nice.
Hi, everybody. Again, if you're just joining us, I'm David Robinson. I'm the Director of Membership and Meetings at the Linguistic Society of America. And we're going to wait just another couple of minutes to allow for more of our attendees to get logged on.
How many people?
We'll get started in just 2 or 3 minutes now.
Oh, yeah. There's no way I can see that. I can't believe I didn't think of that. I kind of redecorated a little. As you
I
can
didn't
see.
even realize. I guess I plugged my phone in, but I didn't even realize that was like a power thing. It's like boom.
Oh boy. It was well timed, all I can say.
Okay, let's go ahead and get started. Hello again, everyone, and welcome to the Linguistic Society of America's webinar on applying for the National Science Foundation's Graduate Research Fellowships Program. I'm David Robinson, the LSA's Director of Membership and Meetings. For those of you who aren't familiar with the LSA, we're the world's largest membership organization devoted to the scientific study of language. You can see on the slideshow playing right now a little more about who we are and what we do, and about a special membership discount we're making available to participants in this webinar. We're delighted to have with us today Colleen Fitzgerald and Susan Brennan, who are program officers at the National Science Foundation, as well as Ivy Hauser, who is a recent fellow in the Graduate Research Fellowships program. The webinar will begin with a presentation by Drs. Brennan and Fitzgerald lasting about 40 minutes on applying to the program, and after that, Ivy Hauser will discuss her experience as applying to the program and her time as a fellow. That portion will last about 10 to 20 minutes. The remainder of the time, which is about an hour, will be devoted to your questions and answers. I have a few housekeeping notes before we begin. First, your microphones, if you have them, are muted. But you'll see a questions tab on your GoToWebinar dashboard, and you can use this to write in your questions. Secondly, you'll see a Handouts tab on your dashboard, and you will find there a downloadable PDF version of the presentation that Drs. Brennan and Fitzgerald are about to give. And finally, before we begin, we'd like to take a quick poll of who's here so we can get a better understanding of who our audience is. I'm going to launch that poll in a moment, and if you wouldn't mind taking just a second to fill it out, it's very quick, and then we will get going. Let's see, and here's the poll.
Oh, there it is. I'm an attendee.
Okay, almost 90% of you have voted. Anybody else care to vote?
59? Mm-hmm. 101. Yeah, they never all show up, do they?
No.
Yeah. We've learned that. But 59 is still good. Yeah, that's fantastic.
All right, it looks like as many people have voted as we're going to, so I will close the poll and then I will share the results with you. Can everybody see the results there?
That's faculty good. 4 faculty or so.
Okay, so without further ado, I would like to turn the floor over to Colleen Fitzgerald at the NSF.
Mm-hmm.
Is our screen showing? Is our PowerPoint showing?
The screen is showing, the PowerPoint is not yet.
Oh, so maybe we drag that over there. How about that? Can
now,
you see it?
Now is it?
Yes, not in full screen mode. But
Oh, okay. So I guess we can just make it bigger.
How about now?
there you go.
All right, great.
Okay.
Hello, I'm Colleen Fitzgerald. I'm a lifetime member of the Linguistic Society of America, and I'm the Program Officer for Documenting Endangered Languages at NSF. I'm also a rotator from the University of Texas at Arlington. I'm joined by Susan Brennan, who is a Program Officer for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, and Susan is on loan from her home institution of SUNY Stony Brook. And we've also got Ivy Hauser with us. David mentioned that Ivy is a GRFP fellow. Ivy is also a doctoral student at UMass Amherst. So we'll get to hear from everyone today. But our goal for this webinar is to reach out to students with potential in the language sciences and other allied STEM fields and their advisors to let you all know about the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program and to talk about what goes into a successful application. So it's really great. We're predominantly students here today, but we do have faculty and we have advice and tips that are useful for both students and faculty. Susan?
And since Colleen and I are both in the language sciences ourselves, I am in psychology, linguistics, and computer science. We're hoping that we can get more interest from students such as yourselves to apply to this program. So NSF has been around since 1950. The program that we run, the Graduate Research Fellowship Program, has been in place since 1952. It was the first program that NSF set up and has been providing fellowships to talented students continuously ever since 1952. NSF was set up to promote the progress of science, in particular basic research. In the official charter is also advancing the national health, prosperity, and welfare and securing the national defense, although we have other fine institutions that do a lot of that now. But we still are the main funder of basic research in this country. In fact, at the moment, as of this year, we fund about 24% of federally supported basic research conducted at universities and colleges. And so again, our program has been around for a while, such that we've had the chance to fund many Nobel laureates. It's in the low 40s, I think, many MacArthur awardees, many other National Academy of Sciences people as well. We have a merit review process that's put in place that deals with both the merit, the intellectual merit of what the project is about, and also the broader impacts advancing the goals of society. And so as a review process, it's terrific because you get feedback about what you submit, and that's not always the case if you apply to a private foundation, for instance. I just want to say, why should you apply for a fellowship? It really can change your life. I was a fellow back in 1986, and it certainly changed my life. Basically, you get to have a lot of freedom of choice if you have a fellowship. You don't have to depend for all of your funding on TA-ships or being on your advisor's grant or paying your own way. If you get the fellowship early enough, it can really help open doors to the program of your choice. You can use it to negotiate which program you want to get into if you're able to know that you have the fellowship before you start the program. It gives you freedom to focus on your own ideas and research a little bit earlier, and it gives you more time because you're not teaching at the time you're on the fellowship program, and you get used to writing proposals to funders at an early age. And so the fellowship program gives you 5 years as a fellow. That's your title for 5 years. 3 of those years you get the support for of the stipend, and I'll go over that in just a moment. But there are additional opportunities that are available to you during the other 2 years. For your institution, most institutions keep track of how many fellows they have because it brings them prestige. Basically, since the process is a merit-based independent process, it's very competitive. There currently are only 2,000 fellows across all fields of STEM research in the entire U.S. And it's very inclusive of everyone, undergrads, women, minorities, people with disabilities, and veterans. We want to recruit people from everywhere into STEM. So the goals are to recognize and select and financially support people early in their careers. This means before they've been overly shaped by their programs, by their advisors, and we also want to broaden participation. This used to be not just an elite fellowship, but an elitist fellowship, and now it's not an elitist fellowship anymore. We're looking for talented people from everywhere, small colleges, large colleges, everywhere. So here are the details about what the fellowship can offer you. The total value of a fellowship currently is $138K over all of the years. And so again, 3 of the 5 years you get a stipend, which is $34,000. It hasn't gone up recently, but it is my hope that at some point in the foreseeable future it may, but it depends on budgeting considerations. Your institution gets a $12,000 educational allowance each year that you're on tenure on your award, and they use that to cover your tuition or health fees or whatever, and so you don't pay tuition while you're on this award. Even if your institution charges more tuition than $12,000, which most do, you still don't pay tuition. The institution ends up forgiving that. You have development opportunities, including traveling and working, doing research in one of the countries that you can see in this little map right here. And you can do that for 2 to 12 months during your 5 years as a fellow. You can also get federal internships, and we'll mention that later on if we have time. There are many agencies that employ linguists and language scientists and data scientists, some of which may be you. And you can have supercomputer access if your research requires that. And there's also something that people don't use very often, career-life balance. So if you need time off from grad school for health reasons or family reasons or to start a family or you know, whatever, then we can help with that. You can apply for a career-life balance supplement. And so the unique features of this fellowship are that we don't give this to your university where they get to pick who gets funded, but we give it to you as a person with a high potential in STEM areas. And so that means it gives you a lot of flexibility. You get to choose your advisor and program, and if you decide to transfer to another university, it's portable. You can take it with you to any accredited U.S. institution, to any STEM program. You can use it for a master's degree. You can use it for a master's and then go on to a PhD. You can switch institutions. You can use the whole thing for a PhD. And there's no service requirement after it's done. There are many kinds of scholarships and fellowships that require you to do something when you're done, and we don't have that. And so basically, In this year, we had about 13,000 applications, and so that amounted to approximately a 15% success rate. And in last year, we had about 16,800, and that's about a 12% success rate. The success rate went up because of the fewer number of applications, and that's because we changed the eligibility criteria, as I'll tell you in just a moment. So basically, when you're getting ready to apply for this, you really want to read this document, the solicitation. It's available online. You can type in this number. I believe these slides are available to you as a handout, so you have this information. And this tells you everything you need to know. You really need to believe what you read in there. Take it very seriously so that your application gets the best possible review, because it is a highly competitive fellowship. Now, you're eligible if you're a U.S. citizen, national, or permanent resident. You have to be either pre-graduate school, say an undergrad or post-bac student who hasn't started yet, or a graduate student early in your training. That can be during your first year before you've completed any training yet, but you're already in your graduate program with an advisor perhaps. Or it can be during your second year when you've only completed 1 year of graduate school, but you haven't completed anything beyond that. You have to be pursuing a research-based master's or PhD. You have to be in science and engineering. That includes social sciences, it includes linguistics, it includes math. You have to be enrolled by the fall following the competition that you win in order to use your award. You can't take time off or delay it. So basically the eligibility that changed recently, and this changed for, it's been this way for the past 2 competitions, you're only allowed to apply once as a graduate student. So you can either apply at this top level, level 1, before you start grad school, or you can apply either as a level 2 or 3 when you're in your first or second year of graduate school. And you can also, there's a special category that isn't used that often. You can apply as a level 4 if you've started grad school in the past and then you've been interrupted for a reason such as starting a family or caring for people who need your care, or health reasons of your own, or economic reasons. You do have to explain this in your application. If you have an interruption with at least 2 years and you're not currently enrolled, then the award would like to attract you back into STEM. So again, the point of this award is to recruit and retain talented people in the STEM fields. So if you're applying in grad school, this means that you're going to have to be a little strategic and talk to your advisor about whether you look good compared to other first-year graduate students or other second-year graduate students. Because since you can only apply once, keep in mind that you'll be compared to other people at your level of training. So everyone should apply as early as possible if you're not in grad school yet, and then you get another chance in grad school. Okay. We can talk more about this and how you would decide in the question period at the end. But there's a big advantage of applying early. Again, since you're compared to others who are early in their career, the bar hasn't yet gone up as high as it would be if you're a second-year grad student. You could take full advantage of the award. You can call up programs you've applied to and say, hey, I got an NSF GRF award. Maybe you could tell me now if I'm in or not, or something like that. You can negotiate. The award is portable. You can use it anywhere you can get in, and it really gets, if you're an undergrad, it really gets you ready to apply to grad school. You know, when I was applying to grad school, I wrote my award at the same time, and that really got me ready to apply to grad school. So here are our fields of study, and I think, am I turning it over to Colleen now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay.
So there's a wide range of GRFP fields of study. You probably wouldn't be surprised to know that chemistry or computer science, engineering, the life sciences, materials research are in there, but psychology, the social sciences, linguistics, geography and spatial sciences, perception, action, and cognition, these are all also included, as well as STEM education. So more generally at NSF, we do fund work in the language sciences, which includes linguistics, psycholinguistics, endangered languages, computational linguistics, perception, action, and cognition, human development, social psych, neuroscience, speech technology, and assistive technology, education at all levels, K-12, undergrad, grad, and learning in informal settings. So actually, if there's a program at NSF, then you know that's what we fund.
Mm-hmm.
Back to you, Susan.
Okay, so let's go through the timeline. So all the applications are due in late October. Depending on what field you're applying in, your application is due in one of the days of the last week in October. So check the solicitation for those due dates. The letters of recommendation, 3 of them, are due a week, well, in the following week on the first Thursday of every November, and so your letters are due then. Then most people are applying to grad school after that if you're an undergrad who hasn't started yet. Then the recipients are announced typically in late March or early April. This year we were pleased to make the announcement a few weeks early, which is great because NSF will be moving soon and we're trying to wrap everything up in advance of that. And then you have until May 1st to decide whether to accept your award or not, and to tell us where you're going to be attending. Now, most graduate schools, I guess all AAU graduate schools, let you know whether you're accepted or not by April 15th. So we've timed this very carefully to coincide with the time when you're making your decision about where to attend grad school. And then the fellowship year can either begin on June 1st, right away, and you can have funding over the summer as you start your research, or September 1st of the year you begin graduate school. So I'd like to talk about the application package now, and then we'll get into some tips that Colleen and I will both give you to really try to produce a competitive application. So here are the parts of a complete application package. So basically you're giving information that's about your personal background, your education, your work experience, the field of study that you plan to enter, or many of you are interdisciplinary, there may be more than one that you're planning to straddle, your academic honors, and any publications or presentations or posters or experience attending conferences about your honors thesis, whatever you have that talks about what you've done so far. And then we have some statements that you write. You'll spend a lot of time on the 2 statements. The first of those statements is a 3-page statement that is a narrative about your background and your future goals. Now, you can talk about your previous research experiences. You can talk about what inspired you as a scientist. We'll get into that in a few more minutes. We also have the 2-page graduate research statement. This is not a proposal in that you're not necessarily going to carry out exactly what's in the statement. This is a way to tell the reviewers how you think about research. And so you're going to design 2 pages worth of research that you anticipate doing early on in your graduate training or for your next steps in your graduate training. And we'll talk about these in more detail in just a minute. But most people spend a lot of time on these 2 statements. Then you upload your transcripts. Those are uploaded electronically. And again, you have to there's no exceptions to the deadlines. With all those applicants, it's like a giant machine, and there's no way we can make an exception and have it be fair to everyone. And it's very important to us that there will be a level playing field. So again, the solicitation should be your guide. And then finally down here, you can see the 3 letters of reference are due the first Thursday in November at 5 p.m. Eastern Time. Okay. So let's talk about the details of this. So just to back up again, at the very top here, the personal information, education, work experience, all that, those are entered as fields in your application. Make sure if you're listing a presentation or a poster, you say what kind of conference it is. If you list an award, make it clear how hard it is to get that award or what kind of award it is, because the people reading this, the reviewers, won't necessarily know what is available in your university in terms of awards and opportunities for presentations. So make sure you give enough context for this number 1 thing in your application package. So in the personal statement, the 3-page statement, this is where you really introduce yourself to the reviewers. And I always think it's a tragedy when if you read one of these applications, you don't have a sense that you kind of know a little bit about the applicant. So Pete, this is a way of drawing attention to who you are, to helping the reviewer distinguish you from the other 30 or so people they may have been reviewing. And so this is your chance to really make yourself memorable, okay? You can demonstrate your potential for STEM research by talking about the motivations that you had, whether they're personal, whether they're professional, that contributed to your decision to pursue STEM and how you prepared yourself for it. You can talk about how your goals came about and how your experiences shaped them. And basically, you know, some people have every advantage in life, and that's great, and they're going to go very far probably. Other people basically have to kind of make their own advantages, and so we're looking for people all over the place, people who have started out with advantages, people who haven't started out with advantages. So this is really your chance to make it clear what use you've made of the resources that you had available to you in your early life and in your undergraduate training, right? Feel free to chime in if you have anything else. So you also need to cover your previous research experience. This is really important. When you talk about projects, make sure that you indicate that you really understood the project you worked on, even if you were part of a very large team. You want to basically show why the project was worth doing, show that you understand it, what your part of the project was, what did you learn from it. Sometimes projects don't turn out as expected. Has anyone had their honors thesis not work out? You can tell us what you learned from that experience. Not everything is successful in science. We all are very resilient. We bounce back when things don't turn out the way we expect.
Just to add in, if you went to the Summer Institute, the LSA Summer Institute, this might be a great place to bring that in. COLANG, if you've gone to the Institute on Collaborative Language Research. There's also been a number of research experience for undergraduate site grants. There's one at Swarthmore. I think there's another one at Queens College, another one at Ohio State. So there are all sorts of research experiences out there in the language sciences, and if you are able to take advantage of one of those, this is the place to talk about it.
Right. The reviewers really want to see that you're not just, deciding to flip a coin and go into science. They want to know what motivated you, and so you really want to show them your experiences. And so if you have an honors thesis, talk about that. Say where the idea came from. All this kind of thing. It's really important for you to contextualize and show what motivates you. And don't present it just as a laundry list of unconnected experiences. Some of you may have so many experiences that you could barely list them in 3 pages. Tell a coherent narrative. You don't have to put everything in there if you're fortunate enough to have a lot to talk about, but talk about what formed you and give some indication to the reviewers of what inspires you and how you think, okay? You'll also need to say what your career aspirations and goals are. Again, reread the solicitation when you're doing this and make sure you don't leave anything out, because the reviewers they're deluged with excellent applications, and you really need to give yourself the best chance to shine that you can. So try not to leave things out. And so make sure you address both intellectual merit and broader impacts in both of your statements. We're going to talk in detail about what those are in just a minute. You want to make that pop out for the reviewer. Imagine a reviewer reading a whole lot of these over and over again, and if they want to go back later and try to find information they thought they remembered was in your application, help them out and put a heading there and make it easy for them to find these kinds of things, right? So the next thing is the research statement. And again, this is only 2 pages. It's very, very difficult to give a little background that motivates your questions and come up with a way to test your question or to evaluate it or to address it, and talk a little bit about your methods and to show what you expect to happen and to communicate what's interesting and new and original about your research idea and approach. It's very hard to do this in 2 pages. So obviously you can't go into huge detail. It's not a bad idea to go into enough detail early in the statement for the first things that you'll do. If you do experiments, for instance, if you're, say, a psycholinguist, you may go into detail about the first experiment and then say something like, well, if it turns out this way, I'm going to look at these variables in further experiments, and if it doesn't, I'm going to do something else. And so, you can't provide detail for everything that you expect to do as a graduate student, but you should say essentially enough to keep 3 years of your graduate study reasonably productive and busy, but then you can just kind of signal what you would do in the future, because you just can't fit it all into 2 pages.
And also enough that it gives a sense of you as an independent scholar, that this is not just carrying out someone else's research and you happen to be a part of that, that it's really independent and authentically you.
That's a really good point. I'm glad you brought that up, because for me, as I was a reviewer for many, many years before I came to NSF, and that's one thing that inspired me to come to work on this program, I really was impressed when the personal statement and the research statement had a nice connection between them. Not everyone can do that because you may be switching research areas, and at least you should the research statement shouldn't come as a surprise after someone's read your personal statement. People should be able to tell it was written by the same person and shows the kind of growth and development of motivation and ideas, right? So if you can do that, then you can have a nice, coherent application. So let's get to the review criteria. These are really, really important, and these are approved by our National Science Board, and they apply across the entire foundation, the National Science Foundation, to all the grants and fellowship applications that we review. They're a little different when you think about how to apply them to a fellowship, but here they are in all their glory and the way they're framed for everybody. So intellectual merit, you can describe that as how important is the proposed activity to advancing knowledge within the field or across different fields. Okay, so if you do interdisciplinary research that impacts more than one field, or if you do disciplinary research that you want to transport to another field, that can be a very exciting source of intellectual merit, as well as the cleverness and novelty or importance of the idea. Broader impacts is how well does the proposed activity benefit society or advance desired societal outcomes. Now, some fields almost write their own broader impacts, and if that's the case, you're lucky, but you still have to state clearly what they are. You can't just expect the reviewers to infer them. Do not expect inference. So connect the dots for the reviewers. So when you're describing your idea and the importance of it as an intellectual pursuit, you can label that intellectual merit. You don't have to label it, but if you do, then the reviewers can find it more easily. Same with broader impacts. And there may be some fields where broader impacts don't come necessarily from the research itself, because it's so basic that it's hard to understand how it could be applied. But it certainly could be brought in the form of who you're involving in your research and that kind of thing. We'll get more detailed about that.
Probably what I would add is everyone struggles with broader impacts. People frequently, so this is the thing you really want to think about very carefully, because you want to be the application that is able to state it clearly, that your reviewers can identify those, so you want to have a plan for that.
Right, exactly. And so here's something about doing that in a spectacular way, and many people don't know this, and so this is really why we wanted to put this slide up here. So basically there's your intellectual merit and there's your research's intellectual merit. Those two things can be distinguished, and it's a very common comment that people will get back from a reviewer that's a little critical because the application left out the research's intellectual merit or it left out the applicant's intellectual merit. Now, obviously, your intellectual merit comes from your ability that's been demonstrated by things you've done in the past to plan and conduct research, or to work as a member of a team, or to take some kind of leadership role, or to interpret and communicate research. All of those things can have to do with your intellectual merit. The evidence, that's the hard evidence in the application, again, the reviewers use all the information you provide them, not just the statements, but the list of research experiences, your grades, whether you've taken hard courses or not.
Have you presented at an undergraduate research conference or any conference?
Honors thesis.
Yes, honors thesis. So what is the evidence? People aren't going to just trust you. What is the evidence that you can present that will show that intellectual merit?
Right, and they're looking in the reference letters too. We'll talk about reference letters in just a minute, but you want your reference writers to address your intellectual merit and your broader impacts as well. And this can be tricky sometimes because, you know what, it's hard to boss your advisor around sometimes. Some advisors are easier to boss around than others, I guess, but you really need to acquaint them with the fellowship and what the criteria are.
I think they call that managing up.
Yeah, we should call that managing up.
Managing up. You've got to learn to manage your professors too.
Right, right. We're easy to manage, our students, right? Yeah.
Anyway, I hope so.
We hope so. Anyway, so the tip down at the bottom is try to address the intellectual merit and broader impacts of your research in addition to the intellectual merit and broader impacts of you as a person. So do the latter in your personal statement, and you can do it by providing all this evidence. You don't have to say, I'm the greatest student ever. That would be kind of insane, right? You don't want to say that. Your letter can say that about you, but you can't say that about yourself. But you show it. It's better to show it than to claim it, right? That's, I guess you know that. So, and then you also need to show why your research is important. Maybe you're working on something very subtle and arcane and you've been diving into the details for years, but you need to pull out a little bit and show what the big picture is, why this research is important to people other than you and your advisors.
And sometimes that is easier in some areas and harder in others.
That's
but
right.
you need to find the way to do that.
Absolutely. Are we on the slide where I should just keep talking?
Broader impacts.
Yes,
so
yes.
Broader impacts, it's important to keep in mind these are funded, these are coming out of taxpayer dollars. And so how is it that this research and funding you as a fellow is going to enhance society? And that's broader impacts. Is the project having an impact on society? Is there increased participation of underrepresented groups? Is there a connection with schools and teacher development? Is there going to be a component that perhaps presents the materials in a museum or does something with public scientific literacy? Community outreach, are you working with science clubs? Is there a podcast that you've been doing and you can build that into your broader impacts? Looking for increased partnerships with academia, industry, nonprofits, NGOs, and the potential to impact a diverse and globally competitive workforce. So if there's ways in which this is going to contribute, this is the time to bring that out.
Right, and keep in mind, no person has all of these things, and if they did, I'm not sure they would have a very convincing application. Not everyone is a good teacher. Not everyone is doing outreach in the traditional sense. So it's perfectly fine to have a kind of unusual profile with respect to the broader impacts, but you have to have broader impacts or else you won't, your application won't review very well. So again, these are just suggestions. There are many, many kinds of stellar broader impacts you can have besides these. If you've started a linguistics activity on your campus, you could talk about your language experience and your travel. That's certainly, if you're taking a global view with respect to your research, all of that can be very relevant.
The computational linguistics Olympiad that involves high school students. There's all sorts of things out there.
Yeah, and if you've started one of these things, I mean, there are broader impacts that you can jump on a bandwagon, and those can be great. Maybe your university has a program for mentoring people and you've joined that. But if there's something you've started, make sure you talk about that as well, because the program really is attracted to people who show initiative and who can be leaders in the future. And the best, what essentially we're asking the reviewers to do is to predict the future, and that's a really hard task, right? And so the way you predict the future is to use the present and the past, the evidence that there is achievement and potential shown in the present and the past. So do what you can, okay? All right, yeah, I guess I say this on a slide. Okay, so again, here are some more information. And again, every single part of your application, the letters, the statements, the things that you list in those fields can address both intellectual merit and broader impacts.
And I'm sure we have this on other slides, but when you've drafted these two statements, you want your letter writers to see them. So if you're maybe off base a little bit, they can give you some mentoring there. Or there's things that you haven't brought up, but you definitely want to make sure your reference letters are, those people have read things.
Keep going.
Which brings us to reference letters.
I knew that was next, yeah. Okay.
So you need to have 3 reference letters for a complete application, and so you can upload the information for up to 5 people, but you really want to be very careful who you select. Somebody may be a really big name, but if they haven't actually interacted with you, they're not going to be able to say that much about you as an individual, and that's going to come through in the letter. So really look for someone who is familiar with you. Is it someone who's a professor? You wouldn't want to have a grad student TA write a letter. You'd want to have someone who is a faculty member, someone who you'd had more than one course with, for example, and the grades in those courses are solid. The beauty of the reference letter is that this is where things that you can't say about yourself get said. And so that is why someone does need to know you and know your work. The reference letter writers should, again, you want to do some managing up, or if for the faculty who are on this webinar, you want to keep in mind these are not like grad school letters. Where reviewers are not looking at the GRE scores. Your letter needs to address intellectual merit and broader impacts and give specific examples. So you don't just say, oh, well, there's a lot of intellectual merit to what they're doing. You want to be specific. And late letters cannot be accepted, so you have to get those in, and your reviewers have to get them in by the first Thursday in November.
Right. Now, the system is amazing. It lets you monitor to see whose letter has come in. So you can send your polite little note to so-and-so and say, by the way, the deadline's coming up. It's in 2 days. Just wanted to make sure you know that. It's a good idea when you ask for a letter. There's a trick to asking for a letter. What I would tell my students is you go up to someone and you say, I'm applying for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program. Do you know this program? And they'll go, oh, yeah, I'm really used to it. You're golden then. And they'll go, no, tell me more. And so then you can tell them. And then you can say, you know, I need 3 really strong letters. Do you feel you know me well enough to write me a really strong letter? And then you count the number of milliseconds that go by.
Yep.
And if it's too long, you can always say, well, maybe you don't know me that well yet, and maybe we could set up some meetings to get to know. Or you can basically gauge what kind of letter you might be going to get if you ask in the right way and you allow people to say no rather than insisting on a letter. Certainly, if somebody can really speak to the details of your project, you can help them by giving them a copy of your honors thesis or that kind of thing, and telling them the kinds of things that.
And remember, this deadline is the first Thursday in November. It should not be October when you're asking for a letter of reference. That letter is not going to have the same ability to speak to you because you're not giving your letter writer that much time.
Right.
The earlier you ask for these letters, that also gives your professors opportunity to do some mentoring and say, well, you know, it's May. I don't really know so much about you, but I have this project I'm working on this summer. Why don't you join in and be part of the team?
Right.
And that'll allow me to get to know you better and you can get your feet wet in research. So these are, the earlier you do things, the better and the more opportunities for growing.
Actually, I'm really glad you said that right now, because one of the reasons we wanted to have this webinar now and not in September when we typically do webinars for people is that you have time now to kind of prepare. So if you have an honors thesis, you can see if your advisor was really serious when they said, oh, you know, your results came out, they might be publishable. That gives you time to actually put the paper together and have it under review by the time of the deadline, perhaps. Or if you have a paper that you worked on with your advisor, again, papers aren't required, but they're certainly good evidence of achievement, right? So you can still get a fellowship without publications, but let's say you have a paper that got returned and you need changes to be made, you can try to get it to move to the next step before the deadline. So by thinking about it now in May, this is a really good chance for you to kind of get all the ducks in a row before the deadline comes up. And the reason we have the letter deadline on in November, it's a few days after the late October deadlines for all of your materials, then you have the chance to give your 3-page and 2-page statements to your letter writers in case they want to remind themselves of, you know, basically what you've done. And definitely have them read through it and comment about clarity, and they might be able to notice that you've used jargon but you haven't defined it or something like that. They may have suggestions for you. But again, you must write it yourself. Your advisor will not be writing this for you, and nor should you expect that. Nor should you allow them to do it if they try. But anyway,
but you can get reviewers would notice as well.
Yes, the reviewers are very sensitive to that. The reviewers want to hear everything in your voice. Okay. All right, so I guess we'll talk about the review process now. We can both chime in on this because Colleen has been a reviewer and she's run panels as well. And so what's interesting about this panel is that it incorporates, the linguistics panel incorporates other disciplines, as does the computational linguistics panel, as does the psychology panel that reviews psycholinguistics, right? And so basically, your application is assigned to a primary panel based on what you list in terms of the primary field of study. But what you should do is you should go online and look at the nsfgrfp.org website and find the choosing a primary field page and look at what your panel will have in addition to a language science topic on it. And you'll need to write your application to be understandable to any of the people who could serve as reviewers on that panel. Do you want to comment on this? Yeah.
So if you're doing experimental linguistics, it might not be that the person who reviews your proposal does experimental work. That's right, application. Or applications, not proposals. So you may be doing endangered, your reviewer might be doing endangered languages, or it might be a cultural anthropologist or a medical anthropologist, or be a computer scientist that doesn't do too much work in language. So you want to anticipate that someone who is not in your precise area is reading it, and maybe even a little more general than that.
Right, and so I think basically it's a good idea to make your proposal application. I'm sorry, we have to say application because these are not research proposals. It's you who are being judged, not your research plan, but you are the one being judged. So you want to make it understandable to any literate scientist who cares to engage with your topic. And that can be people from a variety of backgrounds. So a lot of the time when you write a short description of your research, you might think that, well, something's really obvious, right? But it's really important to connect the dots for the reviewers. If something hasn't been done before, make it clear which thing that you're doing hasn't been done before and which things you're building on. If you want, you can make it clear what is more unpredictable or risky, and what previous work has done. So again, the reviewers without the same background as you won't have that, and you have to tell them that.
You
Right.
don't want a reviewer to read your proposal, application,
Yeah.
read your application and
Yeah.
say, well, I don't think this can be done, because you haven't kind of given a sense of how you would respond in your work if that presented a hurdle that wasn't thought of.
Right,
So,
right, and it's a real trick to give just enough background. But again, you can have your statements read by some of your mentors, and they can give you a sense for whether you've succeeded in that or not. And virtually every panel is quite a spread of disciplines. So it's not that the language sciences are less or more interdisciplinary than others, but most people would consider the panels to be interdisciplinary.
but again, even if it was all linguists, not
Yeah.
all linguists do the same work.
That's right. You have theoretical linguistics,
Yeah.
computational linguistics, experimental, right? So let's talk about holistic review. We encourage reviewers not to use cutoffs for GPAs, not to count publications, because again, you don't have to have a publication to be a very high potential applicant. And so they're instructed and trained to use holistic review, which is a really flexible way of assessing your interests and your competencies, and by which we give consideration to your experiences, your attributes, your achievements, and all together in looking at the entire application, how you've demonstrated potential for significant achievements in the future. And so again, if there's something about you that's not perfect, imagine that, like one's undergrad GPA in a particular course, you can make it clear what led to that if there's a reason. So for instance, if your first year as an undergrad was a bit bumpy GPA-wise, and you were in a different major and you switched, you can certainly discuss that if you want. Or again, you don't want to completely make the whole application about that, but you can have a letter address that also.
Yeah, often the
Yeah.
letter is a really good strategy. If you have a faculty mentor who has seen your work and knows what particular struggles that you've had, often that letter is a good place to talk about that. Oh, they had this challenge, but they were able to resolve it, and look at the great stuff we got out of it.
That's right, because scientists need to be resilient. Have you noticed? I mean, either your work might not go well, or your funding might get cut off, or there could be all kinds of things that happen. And we're not going to go anywhere unless we build this resilience in ourselves during our training. And so if you can demonstrate that and your sophistication about that, I think that can really be a plus in an application. Yeah, okay. All right, and so before you begin, you can ask yourself these things.
What is compelling and unique about you, your project, your life story? You really want to think about using this application as a way to present something compelling. It's not just everyone, it's you. So you really want that sense of who you are as a person and a researcher to come through in your two sets of statements.
Right, right. And if you see your background is unusual or quirky, don't try to camouflage that, but just explain it. Okay. Yeah.
When did you become interested in the field? What have you learned about it that convinces you that you're well suited? How have you done this learning? Has it been through classes, readings, fieldwork, international fieldwork, conferences? And what are the reasons that you can give reviewers to be interested in you? So there's a bunch of applications that people are going to be reading for these review panels. You want to make yourself be as compelling, unique, and special as you are. You want that to come through in your application.
Right. People should really feel kind of like they know you or know a version of you. Of course, you're much deeper than 5 pages of statements, obviously. But so good advice, again, as we said, is to start early. You can start getting everything all ready for your application come October. You want to really make the solicitation your guide. Take very seriously anything we've said. If you're in one of the biomedical fields, again, NSF doesn't fund medical research, so keep that in mind. And so you don't want your application to be deemed ineligible. So you shouldn't apply if what you're interested in is therapy or something like that. But if you're doing basic research, then you need to frame it as basic research, and the solicitation has guidance on that. You want to read the NSF GRFP websites. Now keep in mind a lot of people who have won fellowships have websites and they very generously release their applications to others to read. We keep the applications very secret at NSF because we consider it private, confidential material. We never release it to anybody, but some people do share. But keep in mind if you read an example that it might have gotten funding because, in spite of something instead of because of it. So don't copy or imitate anyone's application. In fact, when I used to teach writing seminars in general for grant writing to students, I would tell them not to look at any examples in their own field or close to their own topics until they were near the end of the process of writing their application. It's good to look at successful applications out of your field, completely out of your field. Look at things in engineering or physics or biology or something like that if you're a language scientist, and you'll get to see what features of an application shine through without being distracted by the topical material that can then constrain your creativity, and you don't want that. Okay, do you want to continue?
Again, Susan was really emphasizing read the solicitation. I don't think there's enough times that program officers can tell people read the solicitation, go back and look at the merit review criteria. People will be evaluating the applications on the merit review criteria. Have people read multiple drafts. This is not going to be something that you write overnight and get in and are successful in. It's really going to take a lot of work and revisions, and you want various people to look at those versions and give you comments. You want to make sure you get your reference letters early. I know in my experience writing letters for students, that first letter in particular is always the hardest. If this is someone who's never written a letter for you and you ask them a week before the deadline, you're really doing yourself a disservice because you're not helping them write the most positive letter for you. You're just not. And people might not be able to put you on their schedule to write a letter. So this is really, really important. And make sure your reference writers see your application materials and see your list of honors and such. That is where you can be, avoid this, pitfall and move towards something else. That kind of mentoring, and in fact, actually, this is exactly the kind of mentoring that students have, junior faculty have, as they go through academia. So you actually being mentorable early on is going to be helpful.
Right. So think about the people around you that you're either asking to help you or to fund you, right? So make it easy for them. Okay, so think about your audience when you're writing. When you're asking for your letters, make it easy for your letter writers to know what they need to know in order to write you a strong letter. When you're writing your statements, make it easy for the reviewers to remember you and find the information they need. And so you really need to think about your audience when you're doing this. And let me make one more comment about the letter writers. Again, Colleen mentioned that you can list up to 5 letter writers. Most people don't have 5 letter writers in their pocket to ask for letters, but 3 are required for a complete application. The reason we allow 5 is so that if something happens and there's a death in a family or something sad like that, and a letter doesn't come in on time, then your application is still eligible. Now, this past competition, this is the way it will be in the coming competition as well, we forgave people for having 1 missing letter. But that still, I think, could disadvantage an application because the reviewers will be seeing 3 letter writers for almost everybody. But if this is your last chance to apply and one of your letters falls through, then you have those extra ones that you can use.
And sadly, there are sometimes faculty who drop the ball, and that may be something that other faculty mentors know. Oh, so-and-so sometimes has forgotten the letters, and maybe that's not the best person to put on there. Maybe you want to have a backup in case that happens.
We can put them on there, but have a backup. And the way it works is that the letter writers never know that they're the backup, so you just rank them, and NSF takes the top ones, right? So they'll take the top 2, and if the 3rd letter doesn't show up, then you will get an email asking you if you want to withdraw from the competition or not. And if you're a level 2 first-year student, you may want to withdraw and wait till next year. If this is your last chance to apply and you're a second-year grad student, then you should just go with it with only 2 letters because you can still win an award. Yeah. All right, so language sciences, continue. Oh, these are the panels, So,
I mean, you should really keep in mind that there is no language sciences panel.
Yeah.
So linguistics applications are paneled with other categories based on what kind of work in the language sciences you're doing. So for example, if you're doing psycholinguistics, then you will be on the Psychology 1 panel, which will also have panelists who are cognitive psychologists, cognitive neuroscientists, and computational psychology. Linguistics, linguistic anthropology, and cultural anthropology are impaneled together. So it could be that you have 3 linguists. It could be that you have 3 cultural anthropologists. You just don't know. And for computer science, again, where if you were working on computational linguistics, this would have panelists from the human-computer interaction, machine learning, bioinformatics. Those people might not know anything about linguistics at all. And this is where paying attention to what you're using in jargon and trying to be maximally clear can work to your advantage, because if anyone in that panel can read your your proposal, your application, then they're going to understand that, and if you've been able to create that compelling case about your research and the intellectual merit and broader impacts of yourself and your research, it's there for them.
Right, right. And keep in mind, you shouldn't worry too much about being read by a scientist who's not working in your field. Often people, well, all of these reviewers we've selected very carefully because they're incredibly mentorly, they're incredibly generous, they care deeply about graduate education, and people in these adjacent fields give very, very strong reviews to people in the language sciences. So again, we don't mean to raise fear in you that it will be reviewed by people who aren't themselves linguists, but you just need to be clear, that's all. In fact,
if you spend a lot of time talking about WH effects and you never explain that, that could create problems.
Yes, define your jargon,
define
or
your
don't
terms.
use it. Only use jargon if you're going to refer to it more than once in your application. Otherwise, just define it and move on. Okay. All right, so faculty advisors, we promised that there'd be some information in here for faculty, including letter writers, but also if you want to promote GRFP on your campus, you can establish people who might have little support groups for people writing their applications and volunteer to read each other's applications. Many, many universities have these sorts of champions and these little GRFP writing groups on campus. And you can really promote it on campus and get more of your undergrads to apply. Or more of your early graduate students to apply. Again, the focus has to be on domestic students, unfortunately, because we can't fund people who aren't citizens or permanent residents. But certainly one can teach grant writing to everyone, and so when I teach grant writing, we have a very inclusive seminar, and people apply for different things depending on what they're eligible for. Try to identify faculty who are willing to mentor applicants, and the best way as a faculty member to become a really good mentor in this area is to be a reviewer. Yes, and you learn a lot about the process. Now, you can't reveal any confidential information about the process, but you certainly know what an excellent application looks like, and you can really serve as a great reader and resource to students at your own university. And so there are all of these other ways you can set up little things on campus in order to promote GRF. And we have some web resources there as well. We have a list of people who have volunteered to be resources at a distance, so you can find someone at your university who's volunteered to help, say, read your application and give you comments. You can look at people in your field from other universities who have listed themselves, and you could try to find a mentor there if you come from a place that doesn't have this kind of resource. Okay. And so here are some final resources. Again, this is available on your handouts. So I think we are done, essentially.
And so the presentation part is done, and I think
let's
we're
go back to unsharing.
Bringing in Ivy.
Yeah, so we want
Just
unshare.
a window? Unshare.
Unshare.
Maybe it got unshared? I think I
don't know. David, do you want to chime in? Do you have it yet? Maybe not.
No, I think we're ready to turn it over to Ivy, who is going to talk a little bit about her experience as a GRFP fellow, and so take it away, Ivy.
Ivy, do you want to tell me?
Yeah, are y'all going to do the questions first?
Yeah. First, would you tell us a little bit about your current research, just to give everybody a sense of who you are and what you're doing?
Yeah, so I am in my 4th year of the PhD program at UMass Amherst, and I am mostly a phonetician now, but I do work in phonetics and phonology. I am writing a dissertation about within category phonetic variation. Right now I'm doing an experiment on VOT in Hindi and English.
Great. And when did you start working on your application for the GRFP?
Very early. Yeah, I'm a good example for this. So I applied as a first-year graduate student, and I started working on it this summer before my first year. So I accepted UMass, and then I had a wonderful mentor, Joe Pater, who contacted me and said, we would like to offer you an RA-ship where your job will be to apply for this grant. Which not everyone, like that was a wonderful opportunity that I was very fortunate to have, and certainly not everyone has a mentor tracking them down at the beginning of the summer. Like I would not have known to apply for this, so it's great for everyone that's here because you'll have plenty of time. Yeah, so I started working on mine in June, and I worked on it until October when it was due.
So I think your information also gives us a sense of how valuable those faculty mentors are. We know that there's faculty on this webinar, and really being proactive and helping your students think about this. You know, it sounds like that also helped you lead into your topic as well for the application.
Oh, definitely, yeah, because my topic was basically a continuation of some of the research that I did in undergrad, and which I was continuing to work on with Joe and other faculty at UMass. Yeah.
And you had you had some undergraduate research presentations?
I did, yeah. So I did not have any publications. I guess I had I was going to have a conference proceedings paper because I presented at WCFL, West Coast Conference on Formal Linguistics, and at the CUNY Phonology Forum. As kind of as an undergrad. It was like slightly, the presentations were technically after I got my BA, but I was not yet in grad school.
Right. I like the way you defined WCFL just now, for instance. You'd have to do that in your application. You did not define VOT, though, and that's voice onset time, but you would do that in your application for the anthropologists, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely, yeah.
So there's an example of jargon that we just let go by without thinking most of the time. Right?
And you also gave us a really good example of off-campus conferences, right? So there's conferences that you have on your home campus, but then you have things that are off campus which reviewers look at, and so if you're able to highlight that, then they see that you are kind of going to that more competitive venue. That's great.
Yep.
Now,
yeah, and if you're an undergrad, you can apply to big research conferences. I didn't even, I think I didn't know as an undergrad until my advisor was like, you should apply to this conference. So if your advisor isn't telling you to apply to conferences, ask them what conferences to apply to.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, you can get ready for this while you're a junior. Actually, I think the best time to prepare is when you're a junior and as an undergrad.
But not everybody's that focused.
No, I know, but if people are, I think it's great. Honors programs are a great time to start this. Yeah.
Now, Ivy, can you tell us a little bit about the broader impacts for your application? Because everybody always struggles with that, I find.
Yeah, the broader impact was definitely hard. Because the project in my application was definitely not what I'm working on now. It was something about feature economy and phonological inventories, and the broader impacts that I focused on was the sort of communication disorders informing speech therapy. So I ended up, I think I even met with someone in the ComDis department at UMass, and specifically said on my application, I will work with these people to, disseminate my results, and they'll help inform speech therapy in this way. And I ended up not doing that project, so I didn't end up informing speech therapy in that way. But that's what I focused on in my application. And I think I was reviewing my own application now as we were talking, and I think one of the things that I was advised to do as I was writing it was not to go overboard on the broader impacts, to be my work is not directly going to inform communication disorders. It's contributing to a literature which will do that. And so I think make sure that you're not overselling your broader impacts, that you're being honest about them.
Yeah, let me comment on that. If you were directly focused on a disorder, that could be almost construed as biomedical if you, for
That's
instance,
true, yeah.
therapy. So I think that advice was really wise. But on the other hand, by interviewing people at your university in communication disorders, you didn't just say, I'm going to publish my work. A lot of people make that mistake. It's like everyone publishes their work. That doesn't count because everyone does that in academia. What you did was you went out of your way to bridge to a group of people who could benefit by knowing this basic result, and you made contact with them, and that showed initiative. And so you created that link, and that's not something, a bandwagon that you jumped onto, which is just, I will publish my work. Of course, everyone's going to do that.
Yeah, so thinking about how a particular area of linguistics can have that broader impact,
Right.
is it something that could work with literacy, and is it realistic, right? So I like the fact that you didn't overplay your hand on broader impacts, because I think that is something that happens in panel.
Mm-hmm.
The reviewers say, you know, this came out of nowhere, and I don't see it as feasible. There's nothing in the record that actually suggests they're going to be able to achieve this.
Or you're
impact.
overclaiming, because
you're
it's
overclaiming.
hard to change the world. And if you acknowledge that and you propose and you suggest something doable, I think that's more convincing. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. Good.
So what was the best advice you got when you were putting this together?
Give it to as many people as possible to read it.
Yeah.
I think that was the main thing that helped me, was that I had every person read it. Like every faculty member who was around during the summer, I said, will you read my application?
Right, right. And let me make the point that you don't want to follow contradictory advice, obviously. Sometimes you don't always get advice. You have to know when to ignore it and when to follow it, right?
Yeah. Yeah, but I knew that like my application was going to be read by anthropologists. So I contacted some people in the linguistics department and said, do you have any anthropologist friends that you think would meet with me about my application? And actually, yeah, we like collaborate with some linguistic anthropologists, and they were like, oh, someone's applying, let me read their thing. So like, don't be afraid to ask your faculty if like they have friends who will help you. Yeah, so I gave it to my mom. Like, anyone who will read your application that's not a specialist is good.
Excellent. That is great. Yeah.
So how have you found that this experience has had an impact on you personally, professionally? You know, Susan talked about all the benefits and funding, but why don't you tell us how that's had an impact on you?
It's so great. So I think the main thing is that when you have this funding, you don't have to teach or be an RA for like the entire period of your graduate career, which basically enabled me to meet all my deadlines on time and like make progress towards my degree and be like way less stressed about it. So like I'm still having I'm gonna have 2 years of teaching under my belt, even with the GRF, which is, you know, still enough to get teaching evaluations and such. But I'm not having to teach Intro to Linguistics every single semester, which is really helping me to have publishable work. Like I have 3 papers currently under review, and I'm in my 4th year.
That's great. Fantastic. Yeah.
And it's like I am 100% certain that would not be the case if I did not have this fellowship. So it's really been a great thing for my professional development.
That's wonderful.
Did you manage to take advantage of GRIP or GROW as a language scientist, or did that not present itself as an opportunity?
Yeah, occasionally I look at them, and most of them are very specific.
Yeah.
So like I haven't been able to find one that was sort of like work with my interests.
Right, right.
So I can't speak to those.
Right. So unfortunately, most of the interesting countries with the interesting languages for linguistics aren't partners in the GROW project, which stands for Graduate Research Opportunities Worldwide. However, there are some federal agencies that do hire linguists. So I should just mention the Smithsonian is one of them. So if you study languages, that is certainly the FBI does this. If you're a computational linguist and a data scientist, Homeland Security. there are ways you can use your language sciences training for some of these federal agencies. And for these, what you do is you're not doing your own research when you're at one of these agencies, but you're working side by side with a PhD holding scientist who would be a language scientist, or working on a language sciences problem that's applied, and you would get that kind of experience. Because a lot of people get PhDs and do not go into academia. So we still act sometimes as if that's not the case, but I think people have to be realistic. There are a lot of great opportunities. We want people making policy who are scientists. So,
and for people who are doing projects that are endangered language oriented, especially around native languages of the U.S., the Smithsonian does have people who are working in those areas who are linguists, linguistic anthropologists. So it would be great to get some GRFPs over there.
Yeah, the Smithsonian is probably one of the biggest users of the GRIP program. They have a lot going on over there. So they post internships too, so you can go there and read on their website about what they have for you to do. Yep.
Well, should we open it? Do you have anything else you'd like to add, Ivy? Should we?
I think I'm good. Let's open it to questions first.
Okay, great. David, will you mediate the question for us?
Yep, we've got a couple of questions already, and the rest of you, please feel free to type your questions into the little question widget, and we'll take them in the order that they're asked. So the first question is, would you say that publications and or teaching is an advantage in an application?
Absolutely, absolutely, right. Not everyone shines at teaching, but if you do shine at teaching, you can certainly talk about that. And publications are an advantage because they show productivity, but you don't have to have a publication in order to win. Keep in mind that the bar goes up, and it just tends to be unusual for a second-year grad student to apply and win with no publications, but if they've had a lot of research experience, that can sometimes work.
And I would add, in as regards to the teaching, there's so many different kinds of teaching opportunities out there. So there are people who are undergraduate TAs, who are undergraduates and are able to be TAs or be involved in teaching. There's programs that are high school oriented teaching, like Upward Bound. So there's a lot of different kinds of teaching out there besides sort of just typical undergraduate classes. And thinking about how to weave that into the broader impacts. I've been involved with Upward Bound and done this teaching, and as part of my broader impacts, I'm going to bring in language in the curriculum, language in the high school kind of thing. That could be a really well received thing because you've got that evidence that you'd be able to do that.
Right, but keep in mind who you're competing with. And so in graduate school, and again, NSF structures this fellowship on purpose to only fund you for 3 years because they want you to get teaching experience. And so most PhD programs require that also. So you want to make yourself stand out, and if you're just doing the typical thing that everyone else does with teaching or TAing the same kinds of courses, that's fine, but that's not going to make your application stand out. So, so outreach is great. It's not absolutely required if you have other kinds of broader impacts, but you don't want to just be doing the kinds of things that come for, that are taken for granted as a graduate student. Yeah.
I think that sort of segues into another question we just got, which is, I guess, directed to Ivy. Is there, how were you able to gain teaching experience while holding GRFP?
So, at UMass, our program is 5 years, and some people do 6 years, which is what I'm doing basically because I have this fellowship to fund my own 6th year. So over 5 years, you're only funded by the GRF for 3 years. So then you have those 2 other years where you'll be enrolled in your program, and you can use those years to teach. And I know some other people who, especially ones that have applied as a second-year grad student and then don't have there's another year that they may not have. A lot of people have done stuff like TAing summer courses. We have some interesting opportunities to do that, whether it's TAing Linguistics 101, or we have an Institute for Social Science Research that does methods seminars, and I think anything like that would be something that could go on your CV under teaching.
Definitely. Yep.
Okay, and then we have sort of several questions about eligibility, so I think I'll read all of them first and then you can respond. So one of them is, the asker says, are there any similar fellowships for international students? Another one says, for clarification, this program is open to U.S. citizens and nationals who are studying or will be studying at U.S. institutions only, correct?
Right.
And
years ago, NSF let you use this at different institutions, but for a number of years now, since well before I got here, it's been just institutions in the U.S. You can spend 2 to 12 months abroad doing research in an international lab. That's what the GROW program is for. And a lot of people do take advantage of that, but currently you have to be enrolled in a U.S. institution. And in terms of other fellowships, back at Stony Brook, when I teach there, I teach grant writing. We do, NRSA writing, which is an NIH, National Institutes of Health predoctoral fellowship. We do this one. The international students do other things, but there are fewer. There's no sterling example of a fellowship that funds broadly like GRF. Not even at NIH. They're quite different. The NRSA program is quite different. But there are a few in the U.S. There's the American Association of University Women that does fund people in linguistics, and it funds international people as well.
Fulbright?
There's Fulbright, certainly. Fulbright comes with a service requirement in a sense. You have to go back to the country where you originated in. But if you're in the U.S., that's probably not a problem. You want to go somewhere and do your research and come back. So that's an excellent thing to do. I've had many international students come and work with me in psycholinguistics, but then they have to go back and do their service requirement, which some of them want to do and others would rather stay in the U.S. So you have to work that out.
And then I would add in, NSF does have dissertation grants. Linguistics has dissertation grants. Documenting endangered languages has dissertation grants. Some programs do, some programs don't.
Psychology doesn't, yeah.
So those are open to anyone who is enrolled in a U.S. institution, in a doctoral granting institution. International, U.S., those are both fine. The important difference is there's no stipend for living expenses. So there's no stipend, there's no covering of tuition. It's solely for the research costs. But one could also be a GRFP holder and submit for a dissertation research.
That's right.
So you never.
That. So yeah.
Good to hear. Yeah.
And I want to add about other fellowships, and for people who may not be eligible for the NSF, COSIAC, the Committee on Student Interests and Concerns, has compiled a list of grants and fellowships that are available to linguistics students, and it's publicly available on the LSA website. And
David, maybe you could put, grab a screen grab and show that and share it on your screen from the website.
Thanks to everybody.
Yeah, I'm sure we can probably send it around afterwards, but that's publicly available, and it's organized by eligibility, so it's a great resource for grant searching.
Right. Good.
Great. Okay, I have another question about eligibility. The question is, I have a question about eligibility in Category 4. Is someone eligible in their first year of a PhD program if they have already completed a master's degree 5 years ago?
If you're already enrolled in a program, then no, sadly. So we're trying to make that clearer on the application website. It is in the solicitation as well, though, and that is a frequent way people can be ineligible for the award. So again, the point of the award is to recruit and retain people early in their graduate training, and so with that level 4 category, we've had people apply who have master's degrees, and they can be eligible if they're not yet enrolled in a program. They will be applying around the same time that they write their GRF application, but they're not eligible to receive an award if they're already enrolled.
Okay.
Yeah.
Next question, are the more advanced candidates, for example, second-year graduate students, expected to have pilot data for their proposed project?
Not necessarily. I mean, they may have worked in that area before, but and by the time you're in your second year, you should have some data from grad school. But NSF in general seems to have different requirements for pilot data than NIH does, and it really depends on a lot of things, what kind of program you're applying to. But for this fellowship program, you don't need to have pilot data. And if you're what I used to not like reading when I was on the other side of the desk as a faculty member was when people's research projects, their research statement sounded like it had been plucked from someone's R01 grant or something. That is absolutely not what we want to see in the research plan. And so having pilot data might even suggest that this is part of an ongoing project, and we want the students' own work to be reflected in the research plan.
And I think I would add, you're going to be, for the more advanced candidates, everyone's going to be more advanced. So you're going to want to be able to demonstrate your independence as a researcher, following up on what Susan said, but also that you're on that track and that you've been making the most of the options that have come out for you, such that you are just as competitive as anyone in the same advanced stage of grad school.
Right. I want to go back to the pilot data thing, though. Again, it's not the project that NSF is judging. So pilot data would be the case if you were judging the project, and that's not what merit is being discussed here or judged here. But if you want to show continuity, you want to show that you're prepared, you want to show that you've thought this through. If it's a continuation of the same topic that you've looked at before and you have data that may be relevant to something else, but again, it's you that we're judging, not the project, and that's why the idea of pilot data just doesn't really ring true. But preparation is important. So if you had data that was relevant because of the preparation it demonstrates, that's important. Yeah.
And again, following up on that, the application is evaluated holistically. So the merit review, we talked about the criteria, but that review process is holistic. And so reviewers will remind each other during that discussion of how they're supposed to be evaluating proposals. Applications.
Sorry. We have to train ourselves because at NSF, most people spend most of the time reviewing proposals from your advisors and from PIs, principal investigators. But these are applications because, again, they're focused on individuals and their potential as opposed to the quality of the steps that are proposed in the research plan. It's not a proposal, but a plan. Yep.
Okay,
I see David has shared the COSIAC webpage with links to everyone, so the resource that Ivy mentioned is there for you.
COSIAC. Thank you. Okay. Have that all wrong.
Okay, interesting question here. I've been talking to my advisor about whether to apply to the linguistics or the psychology 1 panels. Is it indeed the case that applicants can decide which panel their applications go to?
Yes.
Additionally, a resource at my university mentioned that you can identify your application as something like 70% linguistics, 30% psychology 1. Is this indeed the case? Thank you.
Yes, this is true, but it's not seen by both panels. It's only seen by the panel that you list first. So even if you identify it 50-50, it will go to the panel that you list first. And the reason we have you list more than one thing if you wish is that NSF likes to keep data on how many interdisciplinary things they receive. And also, if one of the reviewers were to say, this is so foreign to me, I can't even judge it, which almost never happens, then we might consider changing it to a different panel, but that happens so rarely. One reason is that the panel deadlines are different, so there's deadlines Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday of that last week in October. And so if you're interdisciplinary between two panels that have different deadlines, then it would give you an unfair advantage to submit to the later deadline and then try to get your application switched to the earlier one. We just will not do that. So so really look carefully at the panel composition, write your application statements with that in mind, and submit to the panel that you want to address because you know how it's composed.
And Ivy gave great advice on how she put her.
Fantastic.
Yeah, I mean,
I've never heard that
together.
actually. That's a really great idea.
So she anticipated the mix of reviewers that would be on there and sought that out. That was terrific.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was. My advice was gonna be for deciding whether you should submit to linguistics or psychology. That one of the things that you could do is like just have meetings with someone in cultural anthropology and someone in cognitive psychology or the different fields, and see like how difficult of a time you have explaining your project, or any advice that they would have in addition to the linguistics people who are your primary advisors.
Mm-hmm. That's right.
It's good practice for the job market too, right?
That's true. Yeah.
From people.
Yeah, that's right. We have many psychologists in linguistics departments and linguists in psychology departments. So yeah, good.
Okay,
Any more
next
questions?
question.
Yeah.
How open to other fields is the program? If the training of the applicant is in a non-science field, i.e. humanities or arts, but the project is in science, does this person have any chance?
Yes, they do. We have a number of applicants who can succeed who are switching from another field, but they will have had to have had some kind of experience in research. So without any experience in a research field, in a STEM field, it would be very difficult. I can't say that no one's ever won in that case because I haven't read all the applications that we've ever gotten, but you really need to demonstrate that you've taken on the new field, even if your bachelor's degree was majoring in something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think because linguistics is often in various,
and
yeah, and I mean, it's very,
it spans, yeah.
But you would really want to make sure that your proposal conveyed your application was grounded in being able to carry out the project that you're proposing to do.
Yeah, yeah. And so you want to show, you know, maybe you figure out that you're a scientist after you get your degree and you've done something over the summer, or you've taken more courses and you prepare yourself somehow. Again, we have to see commitment and evidence for potential, and it's hard to demonstrate that if you apply the minute you switch fields.
And if that is your background, you know, thinking about doing something like the Summer Institute where you could pick up linguistics or co-lang, these are things that are going to show a commitment to getting the training to put something together.
Right, right, right. And again, we have a lot of people who apply post-bac, and they have done really interesting things in between, and that can be the focus of a stellar application if they bring some other perspective to the field, and often reviewers can look very favorably on that if it's a good, interesting, coherent story.
I think it would also be important to make sure that at least one of your mentors reading the application was in the sciences. Because they're going to be able to give you that advice on how to frame things the way linguists talk or the way psychologists talk.
Right, right.
Okay, another question. I'm going into my second year of graduate school this fall. I came to graduate school directly from undergrad. I have garnered 2 letter writers from my graduate program. Would having 1 letter writer from my undergraduate institution be acceptable?
Oh, of course. And if they know you very well, especially, that could be really good. I think it's hard when people don't have any letter writers from their current new program. That can be difficult. Many reviewers don't care. They just look at the letter itself and, you know, the characteristics that come to the fore. But some reviewers do look for that. NSF doesn't constrain reviewers in, again, they want them to use holistic criteria in evaluating these. So we actually value the diversity that the reviewers bring to the panel as well. And so not everyone is weighing things. Everyone is using intellectual merit and broader impacts, but not everyone is giving equal weight to how they treat the pieces of evidence. And so based on their own backgrounds, they will weigh some evidence differently than others. So again, it's good to write to a diverse audience,
Susan,
I think.
So I have a question for Susan, which is, so if people are going for non-professors as letter writers, are there, how much have you seen that? What kinds of people are those?
Oh, that's really
or are there things to avoid?
Well, you know, reviewers, we train reviewers not to be biased, and of course everyone's biased. I know this as a psychologist, and we all have assumptions that we start out with. So we encourage people to acknowledge what their assumptions are, and there are still a lot of faculty who do assume that everyone is going to be a mini-me. They're going to all train for academia. But when they get involved in the discussions in the panel, then the other panelists will often remind them, and we do try to remind them at the beginning of every panel, that there's a whole diversity of roles out there that we want scientists to take. And so if you do not want to go into academia, I think you're safe in declaring that, and you know, you want to explain why and what your scientific contribution, what you imagine it will be. Or if you don't know, you can say that as well, because most people don't really know exactly what they're going to do until they've seen what the options are.
But in terms of getting your reference writers, are there
do you want them all as academics?
Well, what I'm asking more is if, you know, if you were going to have a non-academic,
right?
What is there anything that maybe doesn't review well?
I think the problem is that many non-academics don't know what a really strong letter looks like, and if they say things like she was always on time, that's not going to work. So it really depends on the kind of challenge that you use. So for instance, I've run engineering panels a lot and computer science panels, and often a letter from a researcher in industry could carry a huge amount of weight, and they typically know what the panelists are going to be thinking. And we also have people from industry on those panels in some cases. So, so that's just fine. If you had someone that you worked for at 7-Eleven or that you babysat for, but who thinks very highly of you, that probably won't get you any kind of cred with any review. I don't think that would help your application necessarily.
So think of your,
yeah.
again, think of your audience. If your audience is primarily people who are academics or maybe to a lesser extent work in industry, you're writing to that audience, your letter writers are writing to that audience, and the more familiar they are with that genre of writing reference letters, the better.
Let me give you another example, though. We did have, I am aware of a student who had an extraordinary background in recruiting volunteers for all kinds of worthy causes, and she started an organization and she coordinated it and won all kinds of recognition from, I think, politicians, and she really was an amazing mover and shaker. And she had someone from a high up position who appreciated her broader impacts and organizational skills write one of her letters, and that went just fine because she had 2 very strong academic letters as well. So if it's relevant to the story you're telling, then by all means, especially if you're an undergrad. Most undergrads don't really know 3 people who can write them a walk on water kind of letter. And the reviewers are trained to recognize that, and that's why they're compared within levels, not across levels. So,
yeah, I think also something to think about with the letters is that you want to ask people who will be like references, like a bibliography for what you're saying. So like if your claim is that your undergrad research has prepared you in a good way, then like it's probably good to have someone from your undergrad as a letter writer.
In fact, it might even stand out that it's not there.
Right.
They were so involved in the project.
That's a part of your application, yeah.
And that is a common thing. If you have an advisor and you're working with that advisor and you don't have a letter from that advisor, you might get a comment about that. And so. And if all of your letter writers address exactly, let's say you're interdisciplinary and they all address the same disciplinary aspect of what you're doing, then you've missed an opportunity to get a letter from the other discipline, for instance. So what Ivy said right now is just perfect. You want to use this to back up, you want to use it as evidence for the things you say in your application.
For what you're not going to have room for in those 3 pages and 2 pages, right? You have 5 pages to talk about.
Yeah.
You need those letters.
Yeah. And they get 2 pages each, and at least at the moment, that's what the letter limit is, right?
Okay, another eligibility question. Can you clarify on a level 4 application? I finished my master's a couple of years ago, and I'm heading into a PhD program in the fall. Does that qualify in that category?
No, it would not, because you've already been recruited back to grad school. You recruited yourself back to grad school. So as of the application deadline in the end of October, I think it says November 1st in the solicitation, you will be enrolled. And so unless your program starts after November 1st, you would be ineligible. If your program started in January, then I believe you would be eligible.
Okay. Another question, do reviewers take into account whether students come straight from undergrad, for example, not having publications, but is a second year?
Well, all of those early students who haven't started grad school yet are compared together. But even if you've taken, after your baccalaureate, if you've taken 1 graduate course, then you would no longer be at that level. You would be at the second level. But there are students who work as a lab manager for 5 years, and they get a whole lot done, and they are compared in the same pool. But usually the reviewers will mention that. And we certainly train them to take into account what advantages the person has had and what use they've made of those advantages. So if somebody has publications and they've been a lab manager for 5 years, that's much less extraordinary than if they're coming right out of being an undergrad and they happen to have a publication. So we do train them to think like that, but of course there is comparison going on directly at that level.
Yeah, I mean, there's always, having been a program officer this year on the panel, there are things that just really stand out. And if you had an undergraduate, for example, who had done international field work on a maybe not even an endangered language, but had done it on a lesser documented language, I think that that's something that reviewers would be like, wow.
Yeah.
I want to add about the publications bit. I know that Colleen and Susan will know like actually how many people have had publications, but I want to add a little an anecdotal like reassuring that I definitely did not have any publications when I applied, like nor did I know I don't know anyone who has gotten one that had publications when they first started grad school. So certainly that's something that will make you stand out, but at least 4 years ago when I applied, it definitely was like not, I don't think it was like everyone had one.
Right. It depends on the field too. So in engineering fields, it's very common to have conference papers, and in linguistics, it's almost unheard of to have publications early on. In psychology, maybe slightly more likely, but not all that likely when you're an undergrad. Yeah.
And I think the good thing to think about, you know, for the students who are listening here, I think the faculty probably already think about this, but you know, or what are the opportunities? For example, on your campus, many campuses do have undergraduate research conferences, or departments have an annual conference, or maybe you want to just see if we could do one. You know, I know, and I had a phonology class I was teaching at the undergraduate level, and I would have them do posters, and we would have 2 days where all the posters were around the room, and then, you know, I would encourage some of the students to submit and work on that for a research conference.
Right.
So thinking about, you know, wow, these are things I could be doing, and you know, I think that's a really great thing for you to be, whatever stage you're at in terms of listening on the webinar. Take, you know, these are things that are out there, and I think Ivy said it great, right? Oh, I noticed, you know, this was out there. Could I do this? Or I think you had a really great suggestion for the students there to be proactive.
Yeah, and universities often have little pockets of money just to offset some
for
of your
undergraduate
expenses.
research.
Yeah. And you can compete for these, but they're often not that hard to get.
And there are also undergraduate research conferences in linguistics. I've seen several batches of program announcements for those as well.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's you know, you just got to start.
Yeah. And keep in mind that you need to demonstrate your creativity and not just be creative. You need to actually show evidence of that.
Here's a good question. What are some things to avoid in a good personal statement?
Oh, avoid just listing achievements in a disconnected way. That's no fun to read. Make sure your audience enjoys reading your application statements. You know, make it coherent. Tell a story if you can.
Can we tell them a little bit about how panel works?
No,
Okay.
that's part of the process. Yeah. We can't lay out the steps for exactly how it happens, but you can probably guess people read the applications and then they judge them, right?
So, yeah, I mean, I think we, back on the broader impact slide and the intellectual merit slide, talked about, you know, this compelling portrait. If people read your statement and they feel like they know you and know what you do, you've really told your story. And the more you can do to tell your story and have evidence that backs up that the story is legit and that you can accomplish the things that you seek to do in the research statement, that's better. So those are the details you want.
Someone should go around and systematically interview people who apply twice and win the second time. And so it's not uncommon for people to get an honorable mention then get nothing the next year because they're being judged at a different level, but sometimes people get an honorable mention and then they win, or they don't get anything and then they win. And you know, as an advisor, I have anecdotes about that, which I'm not going to go into detail because these are personal stories, but again, this laundry list idea, you know, it's still the same person in both competitions, but if you're not taking care in terms of how you present the real you, and you're just listing 100 experiences you've had, you know, you can see why someone might judge, well, this person is obviously very talented and advantaged, but they just don't strike me as someone who's going to have a huge impact on the field and on society as a whole.
Yeah, I'd like to add maybe like the opposite end of that spectrum, something that I've been trained in and mentoring on grant writing is, especially for things like the NSF where they're funding the person, you want to communicate like how passionate you are about your field, but you can sometimes go into the like maybe too emotional area.
Don't do that.
And then I guess like the other end of that is just like listing all of your accomplishments and not showing that like you are a real person who is interested in this field for these reasons and is very passionate about it, but doesn't spend a lot of time talking about how linguistics makes you feel happy or something. Like,
yeah, yeah. No, that's a great example. And so you don't want to read an application that says, I am passionate. That's not
Yeah.
convincing. You want to show by what you describe and how you write about it. But you don't need to use the
No.
word. Do not
Yeah.
make claims.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was just at something 2 days ago with
Yeah.
some visitors to NSF,
Yeah.
and someone got up and talked, and one of the visitors was like, I could just tell how passionate you are. That's got to resonate out, right? That's what I mean when I say a compelling portrait of yourself as a researcher.
Right, right.
That's coming through if you've written that application right.
Yeah. And you want to show that you're a good scientist, and that there's this tendency to want to really turn up the volume, I think. You know, I teach students how to write in general, and you know, putting in too many adjectives actually takes away from the impact that you have. And sometimes just a simple statement can be very, very compelling without adding all that extra verbiage, right? So
we're talking about a 2-page statement, a 3-page statement, and those adjectives may not be your friends.
Yeah, no, they're not your friend. They're absolutely not your friend. Define your jargon. That's the other problem. So I've seen applications founder because they just don't make it clear what they're talking about.
Yeah, I have my little personal anecdote about this is that I was doing my project proposal was on like phonological inventories and features of inventories, okay? And then I gave it to like, you know, my mom or some other like a friend who was not a linguist, and they get to the end of it and they said, oh, like this is so great. I think it's so interesting, but I just have one question. What's an inventory? And I was like, what's an inventory? And it was like I had totally neglected to explain like, you know, what a phoneme is, like what a sound, and they were like, I have no idea what sound system means, like.
Yeah.
And that was my entire project was about that. So
make sure, like, your mom is probably more helpful than other people's moms. Some moms just go, you were so smart. I didn't understand any of it. Well, that's not a success, right? So make sure you show it to people who are willing to tell you what's wrong with it, right?
Yeah, that's true.
Yep.
That's great advice. Another question, is there an advantage or disadvantage to having a very well-known professor writing one of your letters? Someone who is funded frequently by the NIH and NSF?
It can work both ways.
Well, the reviewers are told to use only the information in the application, and so they don't go out and Google anything. You can't include links to anything. They're not supposed to be looking people up. But of course, there's letterhead, and you know where people are coming from is clear. If a letter shows up not on letterhead, again, that's not really in your control because you're not uploading the letters. Your letter writers are, but you know, sometimes a reviewer will comment that there is no letterhead or something like that. They don't know who this person is. In terms of famous people,